Valentine's Day, 2024. In exactly 24 hours, my entire school was meant to become a killing field. But this isn't just another story about a thwarted school shooting. This is how Valentine's Day, a day meant for love and happiness, almost became another dark chapter in American history. I'm a teacher at Mooresville High School, and on the 13th of February, 2024, I discovered something that still haunts my dreams. You see, Trinity Shockley wasn't just another quiet student in the hallways. She was methodically planning what could have been one of the deadliest school shootings in our nation's history. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight, like pieces of a horrifying puzzle that none of us could see clearly until it was almost too late. I remember that Tuesday morning vividly, the way the winter sun cast long shadows through the classroom windows, the sound of students laughing in the hallway, and that sickening moment when everything changed. A student's desperate confession, tears streaming down her face, as she handed me a crumpled note that would unravel a plot 12 months in the making. "Miss Thompson," she had whispered, her voice trembling, "I think my best friend is going to kill us all tomorrow." Those words sent ice through my veins, but they saved countless lives. This is the story of how a normal school day turned into a race against time, a story about the darkness that can hide behind seemingly innocent faces, and how the shadow of Parkland almost fell across another American community. Looking back, the warning signs seem so obvious now. Trinity had always been different, brilliant but distant, obsessed with true crime and mass shooter documentaries. But we'd written it off as a phase, a teenage fascination with the macabre. Nobody knew she was taking notes, planning, calculating. In the months leading up to that February, she'd transformed her bedroom into a command center of sorts. The police would later find detailed maps of the school, schedules of security patrol routes, and lists. Oh God, the lists. Names of students and teachers, categorized by where they would likely be during each period. She'd studied the Parkland shooting like it was a blueprint, learning from what she saw as their mistakes, the tactical gear she'd acquired piece by piece, ordering from different sources to avoid suspicion, the weapons she'd managed to get her hands on, each one carefully chosen for maximum impact. She'd even picked Valentine's Day deliberately, not just because of Parkland, but because she knew the school would be hosting a special lunch event. Everyone would be gathered in the cafeteria. Maximum casualties, she'd written in her journal. No escape routes. The more we uncovered, the more horrifying it became. She'd created a detailed timeline, marking primary and secondary targets, plotting movement patterns through the building. She'd even accounted for police response times, planning to barricade specific doors to delay intervention. The investigation moved at a terrifying pace after that first confession. As I sat in the principal's office with the police, watching them scroll through Trinity's social media accounts, my whole world shifted. There were hundreds of posts, hidden behind anonymous accounts and encrypted messages, revealing a mind consumed by darkness. She'd been reaching out to others who shared her horrifying interests, building a network of enablers who encouraged her plans. The most chilling part was how normal she appeared on the surface. Just that morning, she'd smiled at me in the hallway, handed in her homework, and asked about the Valentine's Day dance. All while knowing that in less than 24 hours, she planned to turn our school into a war zone. The police found her manifesto, 64 pages of detailed plans, ideological rants, and disturbing sketches. She'd written about wanting to make history, to show them all what real fear feels like. Among her belongings, they discovered a countdown calendar, with the 14th of February marked in red. Next to it, a simple phrase that still makes my blood run cold. Day 0, when love dies. The level of planning was unprecedented. She'd even calculated the exact time it would take for first responders to arrive, planning to use that window for maximum effect. The arrest happened just after midnight. I was there, standing in the police command center, watching the live feed as SWAT teams surrounded her house. They moved in silence, their movements precise and practiced. Trinity was awake, making final preparations in her room. When they breached the door, she didn't resist. She smiled. That smile, caught on the body cameras, was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. It wasn't the smile of someone who'd been caught. It was the smile of someone who knew they'd already left their mark. In her room, they found everything laid out with military precision. The clothes she planned to wear, the weapons cleaned and loaded, even a packed lunch, as if she was preparing for just another school day. There was a letter, addressed to the media, explaining her motivations. She wanted it to be read on air after the fact, a final message to a world she planned to shock. The tactical gear she'd acquired was professional grade, body armor, combat boots, and a mask with a hand-painted smile. She'd practiced loading and reloading her weapons hundreds of times, timing herself, always trying to be faster. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, press conferences, and crushing realizations. Students who'd sat next to Trinity in class came forward with stories, little comments she'd made, subtle hints that now seemed like glaring warnings. Her best friend, the one who'd saved us all with that crumpled note, was devastated. She told me it would be beautiful. She sobbed during her statement. She said we'd all understand once it was done. The school counselors worked overtime, helping students process the trauma of what almost happened. The hardest part was realizing how close we'd come to catastrophe. If that note hadn't found its way to my desk, if that friend hadn't found the courage to speak up. The what-ifs were endless and haunting. Parents hugged their children tighter, teachers looked at their classrooms differently, and everyone wondered how well they really knew the people around them. The investigation revealed that Trinity had been tracking the movements of specific teachers and students for months, learning their routines, identifying the most vulnerable moments. Today, Mooresville High School is different. We're safer, more aware, but also changed in ways that can't be undone. Trinity Shockley awaits trial. Her story now a cautionary tale about the darkness that can hide behind everyday faces. The Valentine's Day dance she'd asked about never happened. Instead, we held a community healing session, bringing together students, parents, and teachers to process our collective trauma. The most painful lesson wasn't about security measures or warning signs. It was about how close terror can live to normalcy, how the line between safety and catastrophe can be as thin as a single decision to speak up. I still teach in the same classroom, still walk the same halls, but now I understand something fundamental about survival. Sometimes the biggest threats don't announce themselves with violence or chaos. Sometimes they smile at you in the hallway, hand in their homework, and plan your death with mathematical precision. We were lucky. We were saved by friendship, by courage, by the simple act of passing a note. But somewhere out there, another Trinity might be planning, waiting, counting down to their own day zero. And that's why I'm telling this story, because the next time, we might need more than luck to stop them. The sound of gunfire still echoes in my nightmares. Every Valentine's Day, I'm haunted by what I witnessed in 1929, on that cold Chicago morning that turned the streets red with blood. I was just a young beat cop then, fresh on the force, making my rounds near North Clark Street. The winter wind howled through the empty streets, carrying whispers of the brewing gang war between Al Capone and Bugs Moran. None of us knew that morning would change everything. I remember checking my watch, 10:30 a.m. The city was oddly quiet, like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it, the sounds that would haunt me for the rest of my life. 7 sharp cracks that cut through the winter air like thunder. But it wasn't thunder. It was death knocking on Chicago's door. By the time I reached 2122 North Clark Street, the massacre had already unfolded. The garage door was wide open, revealing a scene that would make even the devil himself turn away. 7 men lined up against a brick wall, their bodies riddled with bullets. The concrete floor was a canvas of crimson, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. I'd seen death before. This was Chicago during Prohibition, after all. But this was different. This wasn't just murder. This was a message written in blood. I later learned the full story of how it happened. The killers had planned everything with military precision. They knew their targets would be there, members of Bugs Moran's North Side gang, waiting for a shipment of hijacked whiskey. The bootlegging business was booming, and everyone wanted their piece of the pie. But someone had set them up. Someone had orchestrated this bloody Valentine's card. 2 men dressed as police officers had pulled up in a police car, followed by two men in civilian clothes. It was a common enough sight in those days, cops raiding illegal operations. The gang members probably thought it was just another shakedown. They wouldn't have suspected anything when the officers ordered them to line up against the wall. It was standard procedure during a raid. They might have even felt relieved, thinking they'd just pay a bribe and be on their way. But Bugs Moran himself wasn't there. He was running late that morning, a delay that saved his life. The real target had slipped through their fingers, but the killers weren't about to leave empty-handed. They had a job to do, and they did it with cold, calculated efficiency. The witnesses who lived nearby told me what they heard. The police officers had entered first, demanding to see hands raised. The gang members complied. What choice did they have? Then the other two men walked in, carrying Thompson's submachine guns under their winter coats. In those few seconds, as realization dawned on their victims' faces, terror must have filled that garage. The sound of the Tommy guns was deafening in the enclosed space. The killers were thorough, methodical. They didn't just shoot to kill, they wanted to send a message. Each victim took multiple bullets. Even after they fell, the killers kept firing, making sure there would be no survivors. When I close my eyes, I can still see the bullet holes in that brick wall, a grim constellation that told a story of power, greed, and revenge. The killers walked out calmly, as if they were real officers who had just completed a routine raid. They even drove away in the police car, disappearing into the maze of Chicago's streets. The scene became a circus within minutes. Reporters swarmed like vultures, their camera flashes lighting up the darkness inside the garage. The bodies lay there, frozen in their final moments of terror. I recognized some of them: Frank and Pete Gusenberg, Albert Weinshank, James Clark, Adam Heyer, Reinhard Schwimmer, and John May. Regular players in Chicago's underground scene, now reduced to headlines in tomorrow's papers. The higher-ups knew immediately who was behind it: Al Capone's South Side gang. But Capone himself was conveniently in Florida that day, surrounded by witnesses who would swear to his whereabouts. The perfect alibi for the perfect crime. As we investigated, pieces of the puzzle emerged, but they never quite fit together. Witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. Evidence vanished. The code of silence that ruled Chicago's streets proved stronger than any law enforcement effort. For months, I worked the case, following leads that led nowhere, interviewing witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen. The police car used in the massacre was found abandoned, its origin impossible to trace. The Tommy guns were never recovered. Every time we got close to something solid, it slipped through our fingers like smoke. The few brave souls who dared to speak up met with unfortunate accidents. One witness fell down a flight of stairs. Another was found floating in the Chicago River. The message was clear: keep your mouth shut if you want to stay alive. Al Capone's influence reached everywhere, from the streets to the courts to the police department itself. We all knew he'd ordered the hit, but proving it was another matter entirely. The investigation became a dance of shadows, where truth and lies blended together in the dark alleys of Chicago's underworld. Now, decades later, as I sit in my old age, watching Chicago change around me, I can't help but think about that Valentine's Day morning. The massacre marked the beginning of the end for the golden age of gangsters. The public's appetite for bootlegged liquor couldn't justify such bloodshed. The sight of 7 men gunned down in cold blood was too much, even for a city hardened by years of gang warfare. The FBI finally got Capone, not for murder, but for tax evasion, a mundane end for such a notorious figure. But the ghosts of that day never really left Chicago. That garage on North Clark Street became a magnet for the curious and the morbid until it was finally torn down. They say some of the bricks from that blood-stained wall were sold as souvenirs. Sometimes, on cold February mornings, when the wind whips through the streets just right, I swear I can still hear those 7 shots echoing through time, reminding us that some Valentines are written not with love, but with bullets.